Breaking news here on HQ Spotlight. It does not get bigger than this in the world of college football. Our partners at 24/7 Sports confirming perhaps the greatest college football coach of all time, Nick Saban, retiring from Alabama. Nick Saban winning 6 national titles in his 17 seasons there in Tuscaloosa, closing the books on one of the most successful runs in college football history. Nick Saban winning those 6 titles at Alabama, also won another one back in 2003 at LSU for an all-time record of 7 for a college football coach. Keep in mind, though, this is going to have rumblings now throughout the college football world. Let's welcome him, Barrett Sallee, John Talty here. John, I want to start with you because I was looking at your Twitter. You said the rumors are flying around today. I was still skeptical. An absolute bombshell. Why were you skeptical, and what do you think now that it's happened?
I think I'm skeptical because we had been hearing, I would say, informed buzz for a couple months now that he was strongly considering retiring. But just knowing Nick Saban and how much he loves college football and how much it means to him, it was just hard to ever imagine him walking away. The way that he was still grinding on the recruiting trail, flying all over the country to visit recent recruits, the way that they played, beating Georgia in the SEC championship game, like he still had it. And so it's just hard to imagine. It was just hard to imagine him walking away. But we had heard earlier today that there's going to be a mandatory team meeting at 4 p.m. Was kind of trying to figure out what that meant. And of course, it ended up being where he announced that he was retiring. But it's a stunner. I mean, the greatest college football coach of all time walking away. It's just, going to be seismic impact in the state of college football by Nick walking away.
And Barrett, I know this is something you guys had talked about on the Cover 3 podcast a couple times leading up to the college football playoffs, the national championship. I mean, your initial reaction, it's hard to believe for all of us that Nick Saban will no longer be on the sideline in college football.
Yeah, it seems weird. New era of the SEC, new era for Alabama, new coach on the sideline when Texas and Oklahoma get in. It's going to be a little bizarre, but it's interesting. And John mentioned it. It was kind of, there's some rumblings, and we talked about this every once in a while over the course of the season because of how the season went. I think it was one thing that I said after the Rose Bowl that I noticed in the press conference is that he looked content. And a lot of us have been under this impression he was going to win a title and ride off into the sunset. And when I saw him in the press conference, I was thinking to myself, and I even said it on HQ, this might be the sunset. Because, yeah, they didn't win a national championship, but I believe him when he says he was most proud of this team, that this was the most interesting and most fun he's had coaching college football in a long time because of where they started and where they finished. And so, it's still a surprise. Don't get me wrong. It's still going to be very, very strange. But kind of seeing how his mindset and how his attitude progressed throughout the course of the season and really where this team ends up, I think makes him probably as content as he would be riding off into the sunset with a national championship.
Well, and Barrett, a content Nick Saban is not something we see very often from any college coach, but in particular Nick Saban. And I thought this was interesting. You guys talked about it on the Cover 3 podcast. Could he even win another national championship? You have Jalen Milroe there. The last natty they won was back in 2000. I mean, John, for Nick Saban, looking at the projection of Alabama that he had, not just next season, but the next couple of seasons and how hard it is to get to that point, do you think he just looked at everything and said, this is the time is right?
Well, and one of the things that Nick Saban's always talked about, that when he felt like he couldn't have Alabama at a certain level, that's when he knew it'd be time to walk away. And I think there's a lot of things that have changed in college football the last couple of years that he's been pretty outspoken about being upset about, whether it's NIL, transfer portal. There have been some things that I think have been frustrating for him, and it's just to do it at the level that you have to do it in the SEC and the level that he has set at Alabama, it just takes a lot out of you. And so for him, he's 72 years old, and I think it's just at a certain point you just don't feel like you can give what it takes every single day. But I do think that it was very important for Alabama and Nick Saban to beat Georgia this year, to reestablish Alabama as kind of the king of the SEC. I think a lot of players and coaches it was really important for them to do that this year. And I think for him to be able to do that, that's kind of his riding off into the sunset moment, to be able to beat Georgia one last time and win that SEC championship.
Yeah, it is. And I think this is one thing that I think we might see more about. It's different for Saban because he's 72 years old. But I think what John mentioned about the grind that these coaches have to go through, that's getting to everybody, whether you're 72 and a legendary coach, the best of all time, or a 39-year-old upstart. It's a lot to deal with, especially from the end of the regular season through the closing of the transfer portal, which was January 2nd, but obviously mid-January in terms of NFL declarations as well. It's a grind. And while Nick Saban, I think, set the foundation for how you're supposed to recruit, how you're supposed to coach in the new era. Remember, back in 2008, 2009, it was Nick Saban versus Urban Meyer in terms of on the football field, but also grinding consistently on the recruiting trail, using that private jet, going everywhere. Now everybody has those resources, and it's almost impossible to sort of figure out how you're supposed to schedule your 24-hour days. So it makes sense that because he's so proud of his team for what they did in 2023, and the landscape of everything is changing in a way that doesn't necessarily suit a guy who's 72 years old, I guess it does make sense that he's moving on.
And we know he loves those Little Debbie oatmeal cakes. He can enjoy those as much as he wants now with Miss Terry there. I do want to correct myself. I said they last won a national championship in 2000. It's 2020. Obviously, it was not all the way back in 2000. Barrett, let me ask you this. Interesting note, and of course, we're going to talk about who's going to be the next coach at Alabama, but because he is now leaving, the transfer portal opens up for another 30 days for those Alabama players. Explain how that works, but also, I mean, could we see a mass exodus, more people coming in? I mean, what happens here?
Yeah, you certainly could. You know, a lot of these guys signed with Nick Saban. They came to Alabama to be under Nick Saban, get that guidance, get that structure, continuously build themselves up to the point where Nick Saban basically has his entire team every single year, and that is first-round NFL draft picks, second-round NFL draft picks. I mean, you look at who's been drafted, it's a laundry list. So, yeah, you could see a mass exodus because there's no knowledge, there's no set structure and direction of the program right now. Will that change quickly? Yeah, I think Alabama's going to go hire somebody very, very quickly. And so I think you're going to see some of these guys wait it out. But there certainly will be some that sign up that didn't sign up for this, that signed up specifically for Saban and could see greener pastures in other places. Plus, tampering's kind of a thing nowadays, and Alabama has a pretty stacked roster last time I checked.
John, what do you think about that, about the players in the portal?
Yeah, I can tell you right now that there are personnel departments across the country that are currently reviewing Alabama's roster to think who might be good fits. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this roster, and there are going to be people, you know, we kind of call it pre-portaling, that are going to be reaching out to the high school coaches, players, agents, things like that. There's going to be a lot of interest in this talent, both guys who are coming in and also guys who have eligibility moving forward. So it's going to be a potential feeding frenzy, and it's going to be really important for both the guys who are on staff right now and the next head coach to try to just keep it together as much as possible and not see all that talent go out the door, because I guarantee you there will be a lot of interest in a lot of the players on Alabama's roster. We're
a little short on time here. We have so many people to talk to. 15, 20 seconds or less. Barrett and John. Barrett, we'll start with you just on what Nick Saban has meant to college football.
Revolutionized college football. Greatest coach of all time. Revolutionized how it operates in terms of recruiting and in terms of how you address every single day. He is the greatest of all time, and he's done it in a very turbulent time in the sport.
John?
Yeah, I agree. The greatest college football coach of all time, and I don't know if we'll ever see another one like him just based on the parity that's coming to college football. His run at Alabama, unprecedented, and will never be done again.
Barrett Sallee, John Talty, we appreciate it. We're going to be talking about this for a long time to come. Obviously, things changing big time for Alabama.
We're going to keep it here on CBS Sports Network when we return. Bryant McFadden on Nick Saban and Avery Johnson, who spent a lot of time in Tuscaloosa.